Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will give you a presentation about Logical Fallacies 1, which is the chapter 5 of the Critical Thinking book. Arguments, both sound and persuasive, can contain logical fallacies. These fallacies can be categorized into two groups: fallacies of relevance and fallacies of insufficient evidence. These fallacies are often psychologically persuasive and can occur in various contexts. This is my content page. We have two main titles. The concept of relevance. Relevance refers to a statement's impact on another statement, with three ways it can be relevant: positively, negatively, or logically irrelevant. Positive relevance. When a statement supports or counts in favor of another statement, this can provide either conclusive or probable reasons for accepting the conclusion. For example, dogs are feline supports the conclusion dogs are cats. Negative relevance. When a statement contradicts or counts against another statement, providing reasons to doubt the conclusion. For instance, Marty is a high school senior, contradicts the conclusion Marty likely has a PhD. Logical irrelevance. Statements that neither support nor contradict other statements, having no impact on their truth. For example, the Earth revolves around the sun has no bearing on the conclusion that marijuana should be legalized. Fallacies of relevance. A fallacy of relevance happens when an arguer provides reasons that are not logically related to their conclusion. These fallacies can make arguments appear valid, but they're not. In this chapter, you'll explore 11 such fallacies of relevance, which are common errors in reasoning. Personal attack. The fallacy of personal attack occurs when someone rejects another person's argument or claim by attacking the person themselves, rather than addressing the merits of the argument or claim. It is a fallacy because attacking the person's character doesn't prove their argument is wrong. However, not every personal attack is a fallacy. It only becomes a fallacy when someone rejects an argument and attacks the person offering the argument rather than evaluating the argument's merits. If the attack on the person is relevant to the issue being discussed, it is not a fallacy. In such cases, it is legitimate to consider a person's credibility or character when assessing their testimony or claims. Attacking the motive. The fallacy of attacking the motive occurs when someone criticizes a person's motivation for making an argument or claim, instead of evaluating the merits of the argument itself. This is a fallacy because it wrongly assumes that BAs individuals or those with questionable motives must always present false or weak arguments. However, not all attacks on an arguer's motives are fallacious. It is reasonable to be cautious when assessing arguments from individuals with obvious biases or motivations to lie. The key distinction is that the fallacy occurs when one criticizes the motives instead of providing a rational critique of the argument itself. Valid criticism of motives should be aimed at encouraging careful scrutiny of the arguments rather than outright dismissal. Look who's talking. The fallacy of look who's talking occurs when someone rejects another person's argument or claim because that person doesn't practice what they preach. This is a fallacy because it wrongly assumes that the value or merit of an argument is determined by the consistency of the person making it. However, criticizing someone's hypocritical behavior is not a fallacy in itself. It's valid to point out hypocrisy, but this doesn't automatically invalidate the arguments or claims that person makes. The strength of an argument should be evaluated on its own merits, not based on the behavior of the person making it. Two wrongs make a right. The fallacy two wrongs make a right occurs when an arguer tries to justify a wrongful act by arguing that another act is just as bad or worse. This is a fallacy because it attempts to justify wrongdoing by pointing to other wrongs, which doesn't actually make them act morally acceptable. While there are cases where an act may be justified by setting the wrongful actions of others, it is essential to evaluate whether the justification is sufficient. Not all justifications based on the actions of others are valid. This fallacy should not be confused with the fallacy of Lucas Tolkien, where someone dismisses an argument by attacking the person's character rather than the argument itself. The two fallacies are distinct, even though they may appear in similar examples at times. Scare tactics. The fallacy of scare tactics occurs when an arguer threatens harm to a reader or listener to persuade them to accept a particular conclusion, but the threat is irrelevant to the truth of that conclusion. It often involves using fear to manipulate someone into accepting an argument. Scare tactics can take various forms and need not to be physical threats. They can involve any kind of threat. However, when the threat is unrelated to the argument's validity, it becomes a fallacy. Not all threats are fallacious. Threats can be valid when they are logically relevant to the conclusion being argued. For example, a parent warning a teen of a consequence for coming home late is not a fallacy, nor is a government warning of military action if certain conditions are not met, provided that threat is logically relevant to the situation. Appeal to pity. The fallacy of appeal to pity occurs when someone tries to elicit feelings of pity or compassion from others to support their arguments. But the emotional appeal is not relevant to argument's conclusion. In the provided examples, the appeal to pity is fallacious because the reasons given do not logically support the desired outcomes. However, not all arguments with emotional appeals are fallacious. Emotional appeals can be valid if they are appropriate and relevant to arguer's purpose. When emotional appeals are used to hinder or obscure rational thinking, they become fallacious. Bandwagon argument. A bandwagon argument is when an argument tries to persuade someone based on their desire to be popular, accepted, or valued, rather than relying on logically relevant reasons or evidence. This fallacy often follows the pattern of claiming that because many people believe or do something, you should also believe or do it. This pattern is fallacious because popularity doesn't necessarily indicate the truth or goodness of a belief or practice. However, not all appeals to popular beliefs or practices are fallacious when the premises are relevant to the conclusions, as seen in the examples provided. Strawman. The strawman fallacy occurs when an arguer distorts an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. Instead of addressing the opponent's actual position, they create a weaker or misrepresented version of it. This fallacy is often seen in politics and other debates. The argument's pattern involves presenting a misrepresented versions of X's view, claiming it is false or unjustified, and then concluding that X view should be rejected. These arguments lack logical relevance and do not provide valid support for the conclusions. Red herring. The red herring fallacy occurs when an arguer distracts the audience by introducing an irrelevant issue and then suggests that the diversion settles the original argument. This tactic is used to sidetrack and avoiding addressing the actual point at issue. The term red herring comes from technique used in training foxhounds. For example, if someone criticized Thomas Jefferson for owning slaves, and another person responds by praising his presented accomplishments and a declaration of independence, they commit the red herring fallacy. The diversion to unveil positive aspects of Jefferson's life does not address the criticism about slave ownership. Red herring fallacies are common in politics as well, where politicians often use unrelated personal anecdotes or statements to deflect from the actual issue at hand. It is important to note that changing the subject or evading an issue is not necessarily a fallacy, as long as there is no attempt to mislead or distract by implying that the diversion addresses the original argument. Equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation occurs when a keyword is used in two or more different senses within the same argument, and the argument's appearance successfully relies on this shift in meaning. Several examples illustrate this. Equivocating grass to mean marijuana and ordinary long grass. Equivocating hit to mean dealing a card and being punched. Equivocating law to mean legal regulation and observed natural regularity. Equivocation fallacies can be challenging to identify because they may appear valid at first glance. In a third example, the argument seems to have a valid pattern, but is fallacious because it used the term law in two different senses, making the premises irrelevant to conclusion. Clarifying the distinct meaning of the word law in the argument exposes the fallacy. Begging the question. The fallacy of begging the question occurs when an arguer either restates the conclusion in different words or engages in circular reasoning by assuming the conclusion as premise. The first type of begging the question is straightforward and involves representing the conclusion with an argument, making it a premise. For example, stating that bungee jumping is dangerous because it's unsafe is essentially restating the conclusion, as unsafe is synonymous with dangerous. The second type, circular reasoning, involves creating a chain of reasons for the conclusion, where the conclusion is already assumed as one of the premises. For instance, arguing that Westford College is better than Agitech because it has better students, better faculty, higher salaries, a larger endowment, and more loyal alumni, which makes it a better college. Involves circular reasoning, as the conclusion is embedded within the chain of reasoning. Both forms of begging the question are fallacious because they do not provide valid support for a conclusion, as the conclusion is assumed or restated rather than being logically proven. As I bring this presentation to a close, I want to express my gratitude for your time and attention today. Have a good day.